Hey y'all, why does ADHD seem so much more common today? It seems like ADHD is everywhere today. 30 years ago, it seemed relatively rare. Now, almost every classroom has several children diagnosed with ADHD in it. So parents naturally ask, is ADHD actually more common or are we just labeling normal kids? After 35 years as a pediatrician, I can tell you two things. One, ADHD is very real, and there are several reasons we're seeing it more often today. First, our testing and assessment tools are much better than they used to be. Second, there is much greater social acceptance that ADHD is a legitimate medical condition. Years ago, many of these kids were simply labeled as lazy or undisciplined or not trying hard enough, or it was a parenting problem. Third, teachers today are much more aware of ADHD, so patterns are recognized earlier. But then there are also modern lifestyle factors that may make attention more difficult to sustain for many kids. Things like heavy social media use, or constant digital stimulation, or gaming, or shorter bursts of information from apps and scrolling, and less physical activity and widespread sleep deprivation from screens. All of those contribute heavily to shorter attention span. These things can amplify attention difficulties, especially in kids who are already vulnerable. A lot of parents ask us, is ADHD real? ADHD is absolutely real. It's not just a parenting issue. It is not simply a behavioral problem. It is a neurologically based difficulty with attention regulation and impulse control. Most of the time, teachers, parents, and coaches can all see the pattern. And today, ADHD can actually be quantified with formal psychological testing done by trained psychologists. That testing helps measure attention, processing speed, and executive functioning. And treating ADD can be incredibly rewarding. Of all of the things we commonly treat, effectively treating ADD can have the most impact in a child's life and can improve family dynamics more than any other condition I treat. I frequently hear night and day stories from families starting the ADD journey. There are generally two types of ADHD. There are generally two patterns that we see. The first is inattentive ADHD. And I use the term ADHD or ADD interchangeably, even though they are different things. We treat them the same and they're very similar. Inattentive ADHD is the child who sits quietly at her desk looking at the teacher, but she's not really absorbing what's happening. She appears attentive, actually, but her brain is drifting. The second pattern is hyperactive or impulsive ADHD. These children struggle with impulse control, attention, and constant movement. Many children actually have a combination of both of these patterns from time to time. One of the most common patterns I see in my practice is something I call the wall. Many kids with ADHD are actually very intelligent. For years, they can compensate and make good grades. They maintain adequate grades simply because they're naturally bright kids. But eventually, school demands something different. Instead of raw intelligence, it requires organization, sustained attention, multi-step thinking, and executive function, or planning ahead, in other words. That's when these kids hit what I call the wall. They can't just rely on natural intelligence anymore. Suddenly, their grades start dropping. Frustration with school increases. Self-esteem falls. Parents start hearing something painful like, I hate school. And sometimes the child feels like school hates me or the teacher hates me. Our goal is to identify ADHD before kids hit that wall. Let's talk about why early treatment matters. There's actually strong evidence that untreated ADHD increases the risk of substance use later in life, which is one of the main worries that parents have about treating ADHD or ADD with medication. Why is that? Because kids who feel constant frustration in school often look for a peer group that shares that frustration. Many parents worry that ADHD medications might increase drug risk down the road. But interestingly, the evidence suggests the opposite is actually true. Treating ADHD actually reduces the likelihood of later substance use. How do you diagnose ADHD? The gold standard for diagnosis is formal psychological testing. Most kids actually enjoy the testing. It often feels like puzzles and problem solvings rather than schoolwork. The testing also helps identify other issues that can occur alongside ADHD, such as anxiety or depression or learning disorders like dyslexia. Parents and teachers can also complete questionnaires that help build a fuller picture of the child. Before medication, we usually start with lifestyle and environmental changes, things like stronger daily structure and routines, regular physical activity to release energy, classroom placement closer to the teacher, reducing distractions, turning off phone notifications, improving sleep, limiting digital media, tutoring support, and a healthier diet with fewer processed foods. Sometimes these changes alone make a meaningful difference, but many families have already tried most of these strategies by the time they come into the pediatrician's office. When lifestyle changes are not enough, medication can be exceptionally helpful. There are two main categories of medications. The first are stimulant medications. These increase certain neurotransmitters in the brain, especially dopamine, which helps regulate attention and focus. Examples include medications like Concerta, Focalin, Adderall, Vyvanse, Ritalin, Dexedrine, and others. They are typically taken only on the days that they are needed, such as school days. The second category is non-stimulant medications. These are taken daily and work more gradually. They usually take several weeks to reach full effectiveness. Examples include Strattera, Qelbree, Intuniv, and Clonidine. Most ADHD medications are well tolerated, but some side effects can occur. With stimulant medications, we sometimes see reduced appetite at lunchtime, especially emotional ups and downs as medication wears off in the afternoons, sleep issues if taken later in the day, occasional headaches, and rarely tics, temporary tics, involuntary muscle spasms. Sometimes children may appear a little flat or less expressive. When that happens, we simply adjust or change the medication. Non-stimulant medications tend to have fewer stimulant-type effects, but also take longer to start working and are generally not as powerful. The most common issue with those is fatigue or mild nausea. The most important thing parents should understand is this. ADHD is very real. It is very treatable. And when we identify it early, kids can thrive. The goal is not to change who a child is. The goal is simply to remove the barriers that keep them from reaching their potential. If you like my videos, please like and subscribe and follow along, and we'll go on this journey together.